And what's the solution, do you think? If he was provoked, let's say, what kind of diplomacy do you think could happen?
Well, I mean, he should have held out at that time. I mean, we didn't think that he had no alternative. Even a week before the invasion, Schulz, the German prime minister, was on record as saying that you can't have peace in Europe against Russia. You can only have peace with Russia. And yet a week later, after the invasion, they became the biggest sort of supporters of the war, with the commitment given to increase military expenditure by unheard of levels and so on. So I think France and Germany at that stage, Europe was divided. France and Germany in particular were feeling the pressure. I think if he had held out a bit more, and there was evidence as well that some of the allegations of the mistreatment of people in the Donbass by the Ukrainian authorities, that some of that was coming to light, that if he had held out a bit more, that would have, I suppose, come into the public domain a bit more. That's been blown now. But the only solution now is to sit down again and talk peace. And for us as Irish people, it's really embarrassing. I mean, we're in Europe. We're a country that was formerly colonised. We got a seat on the UN Security Council for a couple of years by basically prostituting our neutrality and our history of peacekeeping and going around and marketing that. And people said, oh God, yeah, we'll let Ireland on the Security Council. We're on it. A war breaks out in Europe, and we're one of the biggest warmongers sitting around the table, where it took Mexico, another country that was also colonized, to raise the idea of peace. And actually a majority of people there in the UN support that call. It's just they're not the US white North Atlantic North, global North countries are not on that page, but everybody else is. And that's all any war can be resolved, is that the international community gets behind people and sort of said, lads, you have to sit down. That's what happened in Ireland. I mean, they go on about Putin being a madman and, you can't talk to him. For God's sake, like, there's fellas in Africa and Rwanda and so on cutting each other's heads off, boiling fellas' heads in pots, and they all sat down and sort of resolved things at the end of the day. There's been horrific violence. The idea that Putin is mad is just a nonsense. The Russians have already agreed a lot of deals in terms of humanitarian aid, in terms of grain and so on. Of course, they would sit down and discuss a settlement as well. But the international community, or maybe the global North part of it, doesn't want to go there yet. They still think there's more to gain out of this war from them. Maybe winter will change that. It's going to be a really difficult winter. It's already getting cold. The refugee crisis is already getting out of hand. Maybe that'll help change it.
I mean, there was a 3-month period before the war where it looked as if that diplomacy and dialogue might come to the fore and that sanity would prevail. I would say that Putin was under pressure from the stronger nationalist element in Russia in relation to the Donbass. He was probably it was partly perceived by them that Putin wasn't doing enough to protect the people of a Russian culture in the Donbass region. But yet, at the same time, he was looking for a commitment that Ukraine would not be brought into NATO. And it was very foolish of the Europeans not to agree to it. Right? Whatever about the Americans, it was very foolish of the Europeans to say, you're right. In the interest of peace and stability in the region, the idea of Ukraine going into NATO is madness. You could have had a scenario where NATO would have been able to put missiles on Ukrainian territory that could hit Moscow in 4 minutes, and they wouldn't have had a facility that could defend against it. So Russia had genuine security concerns, but yet at the same time, was Ukraine going to go into NATO this year or next year or the year after or any time in the next 5 years or the next 10 years? I don't think so. And I don't think Putin, I think if Putin had been stronger, I think he would have refused to invade. But on the other foot, we honestly feel as well that if Merkel had still been in power in Germany, there was a less likelihood of war breaking out. Merkel was the one real strong member state leader in Germany for the last while. We didn't necessarily like her politics, but she was tough, she was strong, And while she had a good relationship with the Americans, it was never at the expense of Germany. And Germany came first, and she was prepared to have a good relationship with the Americans afterwards, right? And there was a lot of pressure on her to end her engagement in Nord Stream 2. But she wasn't for buckling. She wasn't going to be turned by the Americans. She was going to act in the best interest of Germany. And I honestly think that if she had been the premier, the chancellor, in those 3 months leading up to the war, I think there's a very good chance it wouldn't have happened. But sadly, we're at a juncture where leadership among the member states isn't spectacular. It's pretty weak, and leadership at European Union level is pathetic. We have von der Leyen and we have Joseph Borrell as the two main figureheads of our foreign policy. And I'm sorry to say that both of them have left an awful lot to be desired and have not helped matters. Borrell still thinks the war should be won on the battlefield, and von der Leyen has been obnoxious in many of her comments. She has brought very little rational thinking to the equation, and a huge, huge disappointment, and a very unfortunate time for the people of Europe that to have such weak leadership at European Union level.